Let me just start with your reaction when you saw the Nigel Bradham news.
Well, it was a little surprising. You just picked him up about a week ago. I think they were looking for some experience in the linebacker core, maybe some depth there. It's an area that they didn't really do much addressing in the offseason. But Bradham, from what I've been able to understand, just did not report to camp in great shape. And, that happens sometimes in this COVID environment where players, especially some veteran players that weren't with teams, didn't have a chance to work with any training staffs in the offseason. So I don't think it's a huge surprise given these unusual circumstances we're in.
Jeff, is the Bradham cut more a circumstance of Bradham not performing well through a full week of padded practice, or, as some have suggested, maybe the emergence of some of the young linebackers?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I think these young linebackers that the Saints have on their depth chart have flashed here in the last few weeks. And the Saints are set with their starting crew. So Bradham really was being looked at as depth. And I think when you start getting down into the second, 13 units at linebacker, you have to have players that can contribute on special teams at that position. And you have to have really athletic players. And if you're not in the best condition and you're looking at a backup linebacker spot, you really have to be able to get up and down the field on punt and kickoff coverage. And so I think that was also probably a factor in how they made this decision.
Jeff, I'm not sure if you've given this any thought, but I am curious, just as someone who watches so intently covering the team during training camp and preseason games, the Saints would have by now played their second preseason game. So we would have had just a much better look and idea of how things look. How do you differ or how is your gauge of this team now different than if they had played two preseason games up to this point?
Well, it's a lot harder to gauge some of the backup players, some of the young players that aren't getting nearly as many reps during practice as they would, say, during preseason games when they might get a whole quarter of work or a quarter and a half of work. And look, we've all heard the phrase before, game players, and then there's practice players. Certain players can perform well during the week, but when the lights come on, they do not perform, and vice versa. I remember Jake Delhomme, when he was with the Saints as a backup, he was just an awful practice player. It's one of the reasons why he never was able to unseat Aaron Brooks for the starting job, because he did not perform in practice as well as Brooks. But when the lights came on Sundays, Jake Delhomme was a gamer. Certain players have that in them, certain players don't, and I think those are the ones that could be getting hurt worse because of this lack of preseason exhibition games.
I guess we could say the same. The receiver, Emmanuel Butler, a year ago, right? He had great practices and then didn't perform well in the game. So he would sort of be an example to the contrary.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know that also for these young receivers that come into this offense, it's so complex, so sophisticated. What they're going through right now are just basic installations of the offense. They're going through now, I think they've gone through 3 times the entire offensive package. So it's kind of a lot of repetition and kind of memorization for these guys. But once they start getting about a week out, 10 days out of the regular season, that's when they start going game plan specific, preparing for the season opener, the upcoming opponent, and they go from Saints offense 101 to PhD level. And these young guys their heads swim. And I think he was one of those guys that got caught up in the escalation of sophistication of the offense. And he basically just was redshirted last year.
Yeah. Jeff Duncan's with us on Twitter at @JeffDuncan_. Make sure you get the correct Jeff Duncan on Twitter. What's the hashtag you all use? Like, not that Jeff Duncan?
Yeah, hashtag, not Jeff Duncan. I mean, there's a U.S. representative from South Carolina who's fairly polarizing and controversial, and I get a lot of his wayward tweets, unfortunately.
Make sure you use the proper Twitter handle at @JeffDuncan_ is where you'll find this Jeff Duncan. You read us up at theathletic.com/New Orleans. Cesar Ruiz, I saw you tweeting earlier today that he was running with the ones at center. So let's start with how he looked today.
Yeah, he looks terrific. He looked a lot better today, his second day of full work at center. He had a couple of hiccups yesterday, which is to be expected. But I think the Saints are going to be fine whoever ends up as the starting center. I think it's based in either or. Either Eric McCoy is going to be moved back to center here after a few days of work at right guard, or they're going to have Ruiz there. But I think both those guys are versatile. They're both very smart, and Ruiz is very athletic. He's got very quick feet for a big man, and you can just see the athleticism. And the Saints, as we all know, we've watched this offense for a long time now. They love to run those screen passes out in the flat to Alvin Kamara, get the ball out there. That requires really athletic interior offensive linemen. That was one of Jari Evans' great strengths, and also one of the prerequisites for center in this offense. And so I think they're going to be good either way, because I think both McCoy and Ruiz can get out there in space.
A couple more for you, Jeff. Anybody that I know, like, whenever you go watch practice, we'll jot down notes. Somebody made a play, somebody stands out, someone flashes. When you're jotting down your notes, who is that, or maybe a couple of names that are catching your eye early in observing practice?
Well, a guy to watch for Saints fans, he was here with the team last year, but he's kind of taken a leap this offseason, is Curtis Granderson. He was an undrafted free agent a year ago out of Wyoming. He's an edge rusher. Kind of worked hard this offseason to add good weight to his body and his frame. Has put on a lot of muscle, very explosive player off the edge, and I think is going to be in the mix as an edge rusher, and that's an important factor for this defense. They've had a lot of good sack numbers over the years and some decent pressure numbers, but then they've also disappeared at times with their rush, in particular last year against the Vikings in the playoffs. They just didn't have much. If he could be a rotational guy in there with Davenport and Cam Jordan, I think that'd be a huge factor. He's a guy to watch, certainly. And if we were having preseason games right now, I think he'd be one that would be standing out.
Does Carl Granderson remind you of anybody that the Saints have had in a similar role throughout the Peyton Breeze era? That build, that role, not every down guy, but a good edge rusher that could come in and spot you?
Well, I hate to bring his name up, unfortunately, because Saints fans do not have a positive taste in their mouth from Junior Galette, but that's who he plays like. I mean, he's a very explosive guy. I think he's a little stronger than Galette off the edge. He reminds me, actually, of my early days covering the Hazlitt Saints when they had a guy named Charlie Clemens, who was an excellent role player, specialty pass rusher. He's got that kind of ability, and he's been, I would say, dominant so far in camp off the edge. I mean, he's very difficult to block. And let's see if it transfers to the games. Just like we talked earlier, can he do it when the real lights come on? All
right, two more things. One, do you have any sense on Kamara, if they're going to get something done here before the start of the season?
No, I don't. I think it's probably on the back burner. Okay. I say that, and they'll probably sign, a half hour from now. But, for the most part, they tend to, once camp starts, they like to kind of put that contract talk on the back burner and let them focus on football. But make no mistake, they want Alvin Kamara back here. It's just going to be a matter of at what number, because he's a key part of their core going forward. And
I saw you also tweet the COVID numbers, and I don't mean to make anybody into a doctor in this segment, but you had a reaction to the fact that the COVID numbers are very impressive. Do you get the general sense, being around the Saints and just in NFL circles, that there's a general? Let me not ask you a leading question. What is is there a general feeling about how this has been handled so far through camp?
Yeah, well, look, I think everyone's pleasantly surprised. But, the NFL, Matt, has got $70 million invested in these testing protocols and equipment. They're using some of the best medical specialists, testing specialists in the country. They can afford to get the best. And I think the work that they've done leading up to camp and the education and all the best practices that they've employed, they had the benefit of time. They could go and send officials over to the English Premier League and observe how the Bundesliga handled these things. A lot of other leagues walked this plank before they did, and they were able to kind of take some of their best practices and employ them here. So it doesn't surprise me, with all the resources and all the attention they put on it, that things have turned out as well as they have.
He is Jeff Duncan, theathletic.com/New Orleans. Jeff, before you go, man, wanted to send a congrats. I saw your post on Facebook, and I saw that you were honored by the LSWA, Louisiana Sports Writers Association, for the Story of the Year in 2019. So There's the picture for those watching right there, receiving the award, man. Our congrats to you, man. It's a great honor.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. Very humbled by that, and just great to be able to shine a light on a kind of a heartbreaking story. We hope we can have a happy finish to that story that unfortunately kind of went awry in the last decade. But there's some positive recent news and developments that might eventually lead to us getting a stadium built down there for Carver High School. Be a great ending to that story.
It is the Ninth Ward Field of Dreams. If you want to go check it out, theathletic.com/New Orleans. Make sure you're following Jeff on Twitter. Follow all of his work again on Twitter at @JeffDuncan_. Make sure you get the right and the real Jeff Duncan. Thanks for the time, man. We appreciate you as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Have a great day.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.